In March 2023 I posted a video on types of storage sidings and it's got 94,000 views. I'd be interested to know why. Around the Yarslow layout I've used various different types of storage sidings, from running loops on the main line, dead end sidings for the midwith section, a traverser representing the end of the branch, and cartridges for those special trains. On the Maykin layout, I've decided that the easiest way to store trains is to put them into short cartridges. So that's what I'm demonstrating the construction of here. When I made the baseboards, I deliberately left a channel at either end in order to accommodate these cartridges, making sure that I had sufficient support underneath them to support both ends and the middle of the cartridge itself. The cartridges are then simply made out of the same material as I used for the baseboard top, in this case 9mm, which is what I've used on Yarslow as well. And they are measured at 3 inches wide, measured and cut using a plunge saw, so that you end up with a load of strips of 9mm ply 3 inches wide. This is exactly what I've done on Yarslow. These happen to be quite short. The ones on Yarslow can be up to 68 or 70 inches long. This is the stuff that I make the sides out of, and an hour or so's work will produce a number of bases and a number of sides, all cut to the right length for use for making your cartridges. And it's worth doing this all in one go, so that you make a big mess all in one go and you've got all the tools out in one go. To put them together, I simply start by putting in 1-inch cut nails through the base of the flat piece at the bottom, all 2 or 3 inches apart or so, making sure that they don't actually stick out the bottom, but get them started. Use a pair of pliers to hold them rather than your fingers. Nothing worse than spending all afternoon hitting your fingers with a hammer. And this is what you end up with. Now, to connect the sides, you simply use my go-to PVA glue, and then carefully holding the sides at right angles to the base, tap through each of the nails, and you end up with one side duly fitted. The other side is then fitted, and you'll note that I've left the ends long here so that they can be trimmed properly. The inside bases of the cartridges are then covered in the 2mm cork that I normally use for putting under the track, and then you have to lay a piece of track on the cartridge. So holding the end of the cartridge up against a post allows you to run the track up to the end of that post, and then you know you've got an even edge between track and cartridge. Out comes the soldering iron, and remember those soldering skills that you've been practicing? Well, here you're connecting 2 wires, one to either side of the track, about 6 inches in from the end, so that we can transfer power to the cartridge track. Now the next job involves some small brass screws. Use a bit of sandpaper or a file to clean up the ends so that they're all nice and spangly and shiny, and a needle file to clear out the slot, and then about an inch or so in from the end, make a proper hole and screw the screws in, with the slots facing along the length of the cartridge. Now at this point you'll hear all sorts of people yelling, oh, you don't want to do it like that, you want to use this method, or brass tube and rods or whatever. Fine, if you have a different method, or somebody else is showing you a different method which you fancy, you feel free to go ahead. This series of videos is about how I make stuff, not how you should do it. So this is how I do it. Have a go. If you don't like it, then you're not going to upset me by using a different system. That's the beauty of our hobby. The track is laid, of course, using the track setter straight gauge, making sure that the end is level, and then you are pinning through the holes in the track setter every 6 inches or so, but don't pin the last 3 or 4 inches of track just yet. When your cartridge track is laid and you're happy that the ends are level with the ends of the cartridge, then lay the cartridge in the bay and use the track setter to align the cartridge with the entrance track. Drill through and pin just as we've been laying track up until now, and then what you end up with is a nice finish on your cartridges. Solder those wires into the brass screws, tuck them in nice and neat inside the cork with a little bit of glue if you want to hold them in place, and hey presto, you've got a cartridge. Now you've got to get power to your cartridge, and that's done by running wires from your main track feed up to 2 screws that you've screwed in the baseboard, one either side of the cartridge entrance. And it's quite clear, I hope, that what we're going to see here is some kind of connection clip between the screw coming out the baseboard and the power supply and the screw in the top of the cartridge. Now it's inevitable that you're not going to get the exact fit, this is wood we're using here, between the end of the cartridge and the top of the baseboard. So if you need to on the baseboard, you could just slightly lower the edge with a bit of sandpaper, or raise the edge as I've done here with a little bit of 5 thou plastic card. Don't think you failed by doing that, it's almost inevitable. I bought these crocodile clips as individual units and added short bits of wire between them, and these were actually what I used on my very first Yarslow layout down in London. The actual Yarslow layout I'm building now uses a slightly different method whereby I've used longer cables, and I've had to use poles to keep the wire away from nearby tracks, but I don't have this problem on the Maykin layout. I can just connect up the power supply to the cartridges and everything is fine. Again, if you have suggestions being made to you of a different way of doing this, by all means experiment with that as well. Then you need to find some loose coupled wagons or something that's got lots of wheels, run it backwards and forwards just to make sure that the joint between your layout and your cartridge works absolutely fine. Similarly, once you've done that, connect up the power and run a locomotive backwards and forwards to make sure that everything is performing as it should. Now to stop the trains falling out the end of the cartridge, I use coffee shop stirrers, or you can use strip wood from your local craft shop, and I cut it the height of the sides and put 2 pieces about 1/8 of an inch apart, with the first piece right on the end of the cartridge, and after that, using card, I cut a door with a slot in the bottom that fits over the track. I tend to make each door unique for its position, so the end of the cartridge and the door are both marked. Now on the cartridges at Yarslow, I've added some handles to make it easier to move them around, and certainly safer to move the trains around. For the cartridges on Maykin, I'm using the same principle but slightly different material. This is 20mm by 2mm aluminium strip. On Yarslow itself I use 10mm by 2mm, but this process is exactly the same. These are my tools of choice, so I have a small bench vise, a hacksaw for cutting the strip, and I have a ruler and a pencil, of course, to mark off the lengths that I need. And I've also got here, rather strangely, the heat gun that I use for heating up heat shrink over soldered wire. And I'll show you why I use that. The metal strip is carefully measured and marked and then put into the vise. And then I use the heat gun to warm the aluminium up. Somebody I know who does a lot more metal work than I do said that if you're bending metal, quite often heat helps. So I use the heat gun, bend the metal up into the vise. Incidentally, the tea towel is because the metal will get hot, and you end up with these hoops. Incidentally, if you get any metal strip left over, I know this is only aluminium and it's quite lightweight, but 1.5 inches or so in the bottom of a kit wagon is really helpful in terms of adding weight and making the wagon run better. Anyway, back to the job. So on the end of each cartridge, about 6 inches in from the end and about halfway up the side, I make a mark and I drill a 5mm hole to take a 1/2 inch M5 nut and bolt. Then using a 5mm high-speed drill, I run that through the hole to mark the aluminium handle, and then drill a 5mm hole in the aluminium. Finally, on goes the handle, nuts and bolts, and you end up with a cartridge which has got doors on the ends and handles to pick up and move the stock very safely.